I need you to do something. For me, my stepmom said, her voice low but steady, like she was bracing for impact. It was late, too late for a conversation like this, and the dim light in the living room only made her words feel heavier. I glanced at her, trying to read her expression, but her face was a mask of something I couldn't quite place. Fear, regret, maybe desperation. What is it? I asked cautiously, already sensing that whatever she was about to say would change everything. She hesitated, biting her lip as though weighing her next words carefully. Then she said it, the request that would shatter the fragile balance of our family and pull me into a secret I wasn't sure I wanted to keep. Promise me you won't tell your dad. And just like that, the ground beneath my feet shifted. My name's Ethan, and I'm 24. My dad, Greg, remarried 6 years ago to a woman named Carla who was nothing like my mom. Carla was vibrant, younger by almost a decade, with this magnetic energy that could fill a room. She wasn't the kind of stepmom you'd see in the movies, the cold, distant kind. No, Carla was warm and approachable, the kind who made an effort to bond with me, even though I was already an adult when she married my dad. My mom and dad had split when I was 15. It wasn't an ugly divorce, but it left scars all the same. My dad threw himself into his work as a contractor, and when he met Carla, I thought she was the best thing that ever happened to him. She softened him in ways I hadn't seen since before the divorce. Our family dynamic wasn't perfect, but it worked. I still visited my mom often, though she kept her distance from Carla, polite but never warm. Dad was happy, and that made me happy. Carla, for her part, always treated me like an adult, not a kid she had to win over. But things started to feel off last year. Dad began taking on longer projects out of town, sometimes gone for weeks at a time. Carla would insist she didn't mind, but I could see the cracks forming. She started inviting me over more, under the guise of keeping her company, but there was a heaviness to her invitations. I remember the night this all started vividly. The house felt colder than usual, the faint scent of Carla's favorite lavender candle doing little to warm it. She sat curled up on the couch in an oversized sweater, a half-empty glass of wine on the coffee table. Her hair, usually immaculately styled, was loosely pulled back, and her makeup had mostly faded. "Ethan, can we talk?" she asked when I walked in, her tone more serious than I'd ever heard. "Of course. Is everything okay?" I replied, settling into the armchair across from her. She hesitated, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the faint hum of the refrigerator. "It's about your dad," she said finally, her voice breaking slightly. My stomach tightened. I didn't know what I expected her to say, but I knew whatever it was wouldn't be good. I leaned forward, the air between us feeling heavy with something unspoken. That's when she made her request, the one that would force me to confront truths I wasn't ready to face. "What about Dad?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. I already didn't like where this was heading. Carla exhaled shakily, setting her wine glass down with a deliberate care that felt at odds with the tension in her posture. "I don't know how to say this, Ethan, so I'm just going to come out with it." Her words hung in the air like a weight about to drop. "I've been seeing someone," she said. My mind went blank for a second. The kind of stunned silence where your brain scrambles to process but comes up short. "What?" I finally managed. She looked at me, eyes glossy but resolute. I didn't plan for it to happen. It just did. "Jesus, Carla," I said, leaning back in the armchair as though putting more distance between us could soften the blow. "Does Dad know?" "No," she said quickly, her voice firm. "And I don't want him to. That's why I need your help." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. My help? She wanted me to be complicit in this. I stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman I thought I knew with the one sitting in front of me now. "Who is it?" I asked, the question spilling out before I could stop it. Part of me didn't want to know, but the other part was desperate to understand how deep this betrayal went. "It's someone from my yoga class," she admitted, looking down at her hands. "His name's Cullen." I stood up, pacing the living room, my thoughts racing. "So what? You want me to just keep this from Dad? Pretend everything's fine while you're sneaking around behind his back?" Carla flinched at the harshness of my tone but didn't back down. "I know how it sounds, Ethan, but it's not that simple." "Really?" "Because it sounds pretty simple to me. You either tell him, or you stop. Those are your options." Her eyes flashed with something. Anger, maybe desperation. You don't understand. Your dad and I, things haven't been the same for a while. He's never home, and when he is, it's like he's not really there. I feel invisible, Ethan. Her voice cracked, and for a moment, I saw the vulnerability behind her actions. But that didn't make them right. That doesn't give you the right to do this, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I know, she said, tears finally spilling over. I know I've made a mess of things, but I need time to figure it out, and I can't do that if Greg finds out now. He'll leave me, Ethan. He'll leave us. Us. That word hit me harder than I expected. Despite everything, Carla had been a part of my life for 6 years. She'd made my dad happy in ways I hadn't seen since before the divorce. But now, she was asking me to protect her secret, a secret that could destroy my dad. I don't know if I can do this, I said, sitting back down and burying my face in my hands. Please, she said, reaching out but stopping short of touching me. Just give me a little time. I'll end it, I promise. I need to find the right way to do it. Her voice was raw, pleading, and I felt the weight of the decision pressing down on me. If I told my dad, it would crush him. But if I kept the secret, I'd be complicit in a lie that could hurt him even more in the long run. I thought about my mom, about the way their marriage had unraveled so quietly, so painfully. I thought about the nights I'd heard my dad crying in his room, thinking I couldn't hear him. I don't know if I can trust you to fix this, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. You can, she said, gripping her hands tightly in her lap. I swear, Ethan. Just give me a little time. The silence that followed was deafening, filled with all the words we weren't saying. I didn't agree to her request, but I didn't refuse it either. And as I left that night, the weight of her secret felt like a stone in my chest, one I wasn't sure I could carry. For weeks after that conversation, I felt like I was walking on a tightrope, trying to balance loyalty to my dad with Carla's desperate plea. I avoided the house as much as I could, but when I did visit, every interaction felt like a minefield. My dad would smile at Carla, unaware of the tension simmering beneath the surface. Carla, for her part, acted as if nothing had changed, but her eyes would flicker with something unspoken every time she glanced my way. It all came to a head one evening when my dad returned from a 2-week project earlier than expected. I was at their house helping Carla with a leaky faucet when we heard the front door open. Greg. Carla's voice wavered as she stepped into the hallway. Hey, sweetheart, my dad said, setting down his bag. Surprise! Finished the job early. Carla froze, her usual warmth replaced by a strained smile. That's great. I wasn't expecting you. I stayed in the kitchen, hoping to avoid whatever awkwardness might unfold. But then my dad called out, Ethan, that your car outside. Yeah, I'm here, I said, stepping into the living room. His face lit up when he saw me. Good to see you, son. What's going on? Before I could answer, Carla spoke. We were just fixing the sink. Appreciate it, my dad said, looking between us. But you both seem tense. Everything okay? Neither of us answered right away. The silence stretched, and I felt the weight of a secret threatening to crush me. Actually, Carla began, her voice shaking, there's something we need to talk about. My stomach dropped. She was going to tell him. Greg, she started, but before she could finish, her phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up with a name, Colin. My dad's eyes flicked to the phone, and I saw the confusion flicker across his face. Who's Colin? Time seemed to slow as Carla scrambled to grab the phone, her movements frantic. It's nothing, she stammered. But it was too late. My dad's expression shifted, confusion giving way to something darker. Carla, he said, his voice low, what's going on? She opened her mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. And then, to my horror, my dad turned to me. Ethan, do you know something about this? I froze. Every fiber of my being screamed to protect him from the truth, but I couldn't lie to his face. Not anymore. I think you should let Carla explain, I said, my voice hollow. Ethan, he pressed, his tone sharper now. Tell me. The dam broke. She's been seeing someone else, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I didn't want to get involved, but I couldn't keep lying to you. My dad stared at me, then at Carla, as if trying to piece together a puzzle that didn't make sense. Is this true? He asked her, his voice trembling. Tears streamed down Carla's face as she nodded. Greg, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen, but I felt so alone. You're never here and I... Don't, he said sharply, cutting her off. Don't you dare blame this on me. The room fell silent except for Carla's quiet sobs. My dad turned to me, his face a mix of anger and betrayal. And you knew? How long, Ethan? A few weeks, I admitted, shame burning in my chest. She begged me not to tell you. I didn't know what to do. You should have told me, he said, his voice cracking. I know, I whispered. I'm sorry, Dad. The pain in his eyes was unbearable. He looked at Carla one last time, then grabbed his bag and walked out the door without another word. As the door slammed shut, Carla crumpled to the floor, her sobs echoing through the house. I stood there, frozen, the weight of the truth crashing down around us. There was no going back now, only the jagged pieces of what was left. The days that followed were a blur of strained conversations and unanswered questions. My dad didn't come home for a week, staying at a motel while he figured out what to do next. Carla, meanwhile, retreated into herself, the vibrant woman I once knew replaced by someone hollow and fragile. I visited her once during that time. She looked smaller, as if the weight of her choices had physically diminished her. I never wanted this to happen, she said softly, her voice barely audible. I know, I replied, though my words felt empty. Knowing didn't change anything. When my dad finally called, his voice was distant. I've decided to move out for a while, he said. I need space. What about Carla? I asked, though I wasn't sure why. That's between us, he said. But I don't think it can ever go back to how it was. There was no anger in his voice, just sadness. And in that moment, I realized how much this had hurt him. Not just Carla's betrayal, but mine too. For weeks, I wrestled with guilt. I thought I was protecting my dad by keeping Carla's secret. But in the end, all I'd done was delay the inevitable. The weight of that decision still sits with me, a constant reminder of the gray areas that define human relationships. Looking back, I wonder if I could have done anything differently. Maybe if I'd pushed Carla harder to come clean, things wouldn't have unraveled so painfully. Or maybe it was always destined to end this way, a slow collapse under the weight of unspoken truths. What I do know is this: love, loyalty, and betrayal are never as simple as they seem. We tell ourselves stories to justify our actions, to make sense of the chaos, but in the end, the truth has a way of surfacing, messy, raw, and inescapable. As for my dad and Carla, their story isn't over, but it's no longer mine to tell. All I can do is carry the lessons I've learned, the scars I've earned, and the hope that one day we'll all find a way to heal.